Hey team, Andre from High Performance Academy here. Welcome along to today's webinar, and today we are going to be diving into the world of rotary tuning. And I know that this is an area that a lot of enthusiasts new to tuning get scared off by, and it's an area where I think there's probably fair to say there's more mystery, mystique, misinformation and urban legends surrounding rotary tuning than just about any other kind of tuning. So we're going to dive into our FD RX7 project car and go through some of the aspects of rotary tuning with a few live demonstrations here on our mainline dyno. Before we get into that though, just a couple of things that have been going on over the last week here at HPA Labs, and 2 weeks actually since our last webinar. The first is that we are running another one of our giveaways. We have got this little Ecumaster EMU black ECU to give away. Don't be fooled by its size. It is much more powerful than its size would suggest. We've actually got one of these running in our version 11 Subaru STI, and we even went through and did a complete worked example on this. So if you do want to learn how to tune it, it's going to be perfect because this package also comes with membership to HPA, so you're going to get all of our tuning courses, so you'll actually be able to see exactly how that goes. As I mentioned, for the size, really powerful little unit. It's got all of the normal features you'd expect to see. It's also got aspects such as onboard closed lambda or onboard wideband lambda control, which allows you to run closed lambda, and something that I see not that many ECUs are providing. Normally you have to use an external wideband controller. This has it all on board. It'll run a continuously variable cam control, drive-by-wire throttle, just about anything you would want. So if you want to get your name into the draw, I'll get Luke to drop a link into the comments, but there are 16 days left for that. You're actually getting HPA VIP membership, I should mention as well. So it's not just our tuning courses. You're actually going to get access to every course we currently provide, and you're going to get access to every course we provide in the future, plus unlimited gold membership. That's membership to our online forums as well as our private members only forum. So 16 days left to get your name into the draw. Head along to the link that Luke is dropping into the comments to get into that draw, and also there are a few other tasks that you can complete to get a few more entries into the draw. Give yourself a few more chances to get involved. Alright, so for those who have been following our season of racing, let's be honest, hasn't really been much to talk about, nothing good anyway. You'll be pleased to know that we finally actually saw the checkered flag. So I'll head across to my laptop screen. It wasn't without still just a little bit of drama here, including this McLaren 570S GT4 that decided to give me a little nudge in the rear end. But yeah, had a pretty successful outing at the first round of the Highlands Sprint Series a couple of weeks back, and if you want to check out all of the action, head across to our YouTube channel and check out the vlog that Luke's put together on that. Gives a bit of a rundown on everything that went on. So it was really nice, even if it was just a 6-lap sprint race. It was really nice to see that checkered flag wave for a change. It was nice to actually get to the start line, never mind the finish line. And the reality here was that given the season we had already experienced, just getting to the finish line for me was a win. Never mind being able to get the car and drive it back onto the trailer at the end of a day's racing. So pretty successful there. In that sprint series as well, we do run a series of classes. So there's class 1, 2, 3 and 4. Obviously don't mean much to anyone who isn't involved in it, but basically the classes are separated by a time breakout. And normally I run in class 2 with that car, which has a breakout of 1 minute 20. So you go faster than that, and ideally go on to class 1. There is an incentive to do this, because if you go faster than 1 minute 20, obviously it's not fair on the class 2 competitors, so you do actually get a penalty. So in qualifying I broke out by about 0.05 of a second, so I was right on that limit, but ended up turning the boost down a little bit to stay in class 2. Broke out again in race 1, so decided, you know what, to hell with it, we'll go into class 1 and play with the big boys, where the poor little 86 was a little bit outranked. In particular, that McLaren 570S GT4s in class 1, a couple of GT3 Porsches, a GT4 Porsche Cayman as well. So it wasn't really a fair battle, but actually did have a pretty good battle with one of the Cayman GT4s in the end anyway. The day, again, as I mentioned, wasn't without its share of issues, and one of the ones that faced us basically as soon as we rolled off the trailer was that the car went into a drive-by-wire fault, so a shutdown. So this is not particularly enjoyable from the driver's perspective, because you sort of end up completely out of power. It's as if someone's turned the key off. That actually can be quite dangerous as well, depending where on the track it happens. And this is a safety aspect that is built into any drive-by-wire system. There are a series of checks and balances basically with drive-by-wire that basically make sure that the throttle position is actually doing what the driver asked for. Otherwise, the ECU decides something's gone haywire and shuts down the drive-by-wire for protection. So that's a necessary evil. Interestingly, this is a problem that was brand new, and it's always nice when you have brand new issues. Raised that problem in practice. I recalibrated the driver's foot pedal, went back out, did a couple of laps, came back in, still had the same problem, and we went through the slightly more arduous task of recalibrating the throttle pedal, and that seemed to fix it for the day. Since then, we've actually had another race, and it came back, only this time much worse. So in hindsight, didn't really expect that recalibrating the pedal and throttle position should have fixed it. So not a big surprise that that wasn't going to be the solution there. However, it wasn't that great having the problem come back. I just want to sort of show you what that all looks like. So we'll head across to some Motec i2 data. So this is actually from a cool down lap anyway, but what we've got here, corrected speed, probably not particularly relevant up the top. We've got the engine RPM in the middle there. The two pieces of data that we're actually interested in here are our orange throttle position and our green, throttle position in green and throttle pedal position. So driver's pedal position is in yellow, orange. So we can see what's going on here. This is out on track, and in particular this point here we can see the throttle position is not tracking the target at all. It's also looking pretty erratic compared to a little bit earlier. Looks pretty good there. This is kind of what it should look like, somewhere it's something like that. All looks pretty ugly in here, and then get back on the throttle and things get worse. And it's about this point here where the Motec says, nah, enough's enough, this isn't good. It's not what it should be, so it shuts down the throttle. So that kind of halts play. You can see that I'm still on the throttle here, wondering why there isn't a lot of action happening. So ended up coming back into the pits. So without trying to spoil the surprise here, we will go into this in a bit more detail, but this is a problem we've actually found with our particular 8.6, which no one else seems to be reporting. About 4 years ago, not long after we moved to Queenstown, I was at the track and the car was running really erratically, and what we ended up finding in the data was that the exhaust cam on one bank was not moving, wasn't following the target. The FA20 runs continuously variable cam control on the inlet and the exhaust, so we had one bank exhaust cam just wasn't moving, which was a little bit weird. Anyway, long story short, found that if I actually moved the connector on the bulky connector, factory bulky connector, this is untouched, unmodified by us, where the factory wiring harness runs from the chassis into the engine, we'd find that at idle, the idle quality would change. It would go from missing and sounding horrible to sounding nice and clean like it should. So that was a bit of a hint as to what was going on there, and in the end the problem with the cam control ended up being essentially the tension on one of the factory pins. Bit of a mystery, because as I say, this is a factory component, we've never touched it, and this looks like it's exactly the same problem that we are seeing with the drive-by-wire fault as well. It turns out it's actually a sensor 0 volt that's part of the drive-by-wire circuit. It's also part of the engine coolant temperature, oil temperature, and inlet manifold pressure sensor. So we find basically with the car powered up here in the workshop, by wiggling the wiring there, we could watch all of those parameters go haywire, and basically fault found it back to that sensor ground. So if we jump across to my laptop screen, this is the factory connector here. So a little bit hard, there's not a lot of perspective in there. This is the offending wire here, offending terminal. Tried retensioning that as we did with the cam control, but doesn't seem like it's that happy with that, and I want a more robust solution. So what we are going to be doing is basically changing over these connectors to an Autosport style connector, something that's a little bit more more robust. The question though comes back to, why is this happening? Again, completely factory part. None of this wiring's been touched or tampered with since the car was new, and really the only thing I can think of is the location of this, which is basically in the back corner of the engine bay. I'm wondering if we're getting a problem with heat basically funneling up through the engine bay off the exhaust manifold and the turbo front pipe, and basically it's acting as a bit of a chimney. That's about the only thing I can think of. Can't really see why that would be affecting the pin tension. And again, these cars, there's hundreds and thousands of them all around the world competing in all sorts of motorsports, so it's a little bit weird that we're the only ones that are reporting this problem, but here we are. So we'll be working through that and hopefully get it back on the track shortly. We've got some filming to do in that car for our data analysis fundamentals course, which is coming up for our racecraft sister company really shortly, so we will be working on that pretty soon. Now, for those who did not follow us last time we did one of our webinars, I did mention that we were doing a worked example on this Nissan R34 GTR, heading over to my laptop screen here. So a colleague of ours was nice enough to lend us this car for purposes of filming. Absolutely immaculate R34 GTR with some tasteful upgrades. In particular, it's fitted with a set of Apex turbos. The engine is lightly modified for a little bit more strength. It's got a front mount intercooler upgrade, fuel system upgrade, including some SARD 800cc injectors, an in-tank pump, larger exhaust system, basically the usual standard upgrades. Previously this was tuned on an Apexi Power FC, and it was a pretty stout street car. Looking at those modifications, we've got the G-Ready intake there, so this is something that we added into the setup, just given that the car was previously fitted with Z32 airflow meters, which fit in here. We don't need the airflow meters for the Apexi, sorry, for the emtron ECU, and they did need it for the Apexi Power FC, so I took the opportunity to get rid of that. So we got the car tuned up and went and finished the filming of that worked example last week. We're at Highlands doing some filming. Basically, one of the last steps of the process where ever possible, I like to take the car off the dyno, take it out into the real world, or in this case onto the racetrack, and just make sure that everything that we saw on the dyno actually stacks up under real world conditions. And you'd be surprised sometimes how much inconsistency there can be between what we saw on the dyno and what we actually see out on the racetrack or real world. It's very difficult to replicate the sort of airflow and temperatures on the dyno that we see under real world conditions, so this can stack up to differences in our boost pressure and our air fuel ratios in particular, so it's always good to just check that out. So that will be added into a worked example in our practical standalone tuning course very shortly. The team are just going through the last steps of editing that, so it should be uploaded within the next couple of weeks, so anyone who already has that course will get free access to that. If you aren't an HPA member and you don't have access to that course, you can check that out at hpacademy.com/courses. It's a generic course that will teach you everything you need to know about tuning essentially any aftermarket standalone ECU. In particular, what we do within this course is present the HPA 10-step process, which is a generic 10-step process you can apply again to tuning any engine on any aftermarket standalone ECU. Once we've taught the generic aspects of the course, we then dive into a library of worked examples, and in that library of worked examples we vary both the type of engine and car that we're tuning as well as the ECU platform we're tuning it on, so that you get experience on a wide range of different platforms. Now, an interesting aspect with this, if we just jump back to my laptop screen, when the car came to us, it was previously tuned, so where possible it's always a nice idea or good idea to do a bit of a baseline pull and just see whereabouts we are, what's the tune like, what's it doing, and we did exactly that. So the baseline tune is this one here that we can see in red, so peak power on that one, 486 horsepower at the wheel, so probably there or thereabouts for what I'd expect on our local pump gas on a pair of Apexi low mount turbos. However, while I was doing those baseline runs, it was quite apparent there was some light knock occurring, particularly at high RPM. So on face value, I wasn't actually expecting to make much more power. The reality though was that the blue run, our final run there, we ended up making quite a bit more power, in this case 528.1 horsepower. You can see down below the boost pressure essentially virtually identical. We're running about 22 psi, about 23 psi peak, dropping off to about 22 psi at higher RPM. You can see we actually brought the boost in a little bit earlier, but this is probably more a case of just having a bit more heat in the exhaust manifolds as opposed to anything to do with the tune itself. It's very difficult to create that much variation in the boost response with an engine that doesn't have anything fancy like variable cam control. So the question there, of course, is, well, how did we make more power? Glad you asked. Let's have a look. So if we head across to the next sheet, so this is the air-fuel ratio plot. Unfortunately, I've got the air-fuel ratio plot here for the original tune, but we didn't overlay this with the final tune because I was using the onboard lambda inside of the emtron. But what we can see here, right at the top of that run, we can see that we're running through around about 0.82 lambda. Nothing particularly wrong with that. Yes, we can tune the engine safely, but what this does, this is a leaner air fuel ratio than I typically choose, and what this does is it creates more combustion chamber heat. And anything that raises the heat in the combustion chamber will make the engine a little bit more prone or sensitive to knock, which is exactly what was happening. So to combat that, we needed to pull timing out. So that's why we ended up at the 485 horsepower on that existing tune, even with a little bit of light knock. Now, what I ended up doing, instead of running at 0.82, I actually tuned this through right about here. So you're just going to have to imagine that the line does what I say it does, but believe me, that's where I ended up. So 0.78. So we're enriching that air fuel ratio just a little bit there, adding a little bit more fuel. This helps cool and control that combustion chamber temperature. Moved the engine away from knock and allowed me to use a little bit more timing while still staying away from knock, and that's where we got the benefit of that additional power. Now, there's probably almost certainly a little bit of run-to-run variation here in terms of the day-to-day, as well as the fact that this engine is quite sensitive to heat soak. So if you do 3 or 4 back-to-back runs, the power does tend to taper away a little bit. The 528 was a run that was done on a cool morning after only just getting the engine up to temperature, but we were consistently over and above 500 horsepower at that same boost pressure. So this is really a case of understanding that if we approach every tuning job with one fixed lambda target or air fuel ratio target in mind, yes, we might be able to tune the engine and we might be able to get safe results, but if we actually experiment and see what the engine wants, what the engine needs, and what it's trying to tell us, quite often you're going to find that there is actually a benefit in going to a different air fuel ratio target, maybe a richer one, maybe a leaner one, and seeing what the engine actually needs. Now, just one thing I wanted to talk about here as well as part of the road tuning. So we've just gone through this. In 2 days we did the R34 GTR, and we also took the FDR-X7 to the track as well, filmed the 10th step for our worked example, which is already live, so that again will be uploaded as soon as we've got that finished. And one of the questions we get in our webinars quite frequently is, well, how do we go about the process of road tuning? And I know there's a lot of people out there thinking that we're going to be driving around with the laptop in front of us trying to watch the fuel maps while we're still trying to control the car, and obviously that's just not practical and it's not safe. So the process that I use is to rely heavily on data logging and work a little bit smarter rather than harder. With the adaptronic in particular, what we're able to do is export a .csv file from the data logging, and then we can analyze this in another package. I prefer to use here Mega Log Viewer HD, but I'll just quickly show you how that all pans out. So if we go over to our log viewer here, this is some data from when the car was out on track. Probably not actually too relevant, but we've got here our RPM followed by our inlet manifold pressure, which is this one here. So we're actually doing a little bit of acceleration pulls here, and then our lambda trace down below. So this isn't really good data for this, but it's still going to show the perspective of what we're trying to achieve. So looking at this data, particularly if you've got a large data file, a large log file, when I'm doing the cruise areas, I tend to focus solely on the cruise area, so I'll go maybe 2 to 3.5, 4,000 RPM and maybe 20 or 30 kPa up to a kPa up to maybe 110, 120 kPa, just transitioning up into boost to see what our air fuel ratios are doing there. Need to be a little bit sensible with how we drive the car. We want to stay out of transient enrichment, so we want to be nice and smooth. But that creates a lot of data, and it's really difficult to be specific on one single area and knowing where we're rich or lean. So what I do is use the histogram or table generator over here on the right hand side of the Megalog Viewer software. So I don't actually have all the parameters logged for this particular file, but you can take my word for it. What we've done is we've set up the X, Y, and Z axis here. The X axis is RPM, the Y axis is our inlet manifold pressure. In this case, I'm logging our air fuel ratio into this, but what we can do is actually go to our calculated fields, custom fields. I've got an adaptronic lambda error formula here. And basically what we can do is log that into this histogram, and it's essentially giving us the error or the correction factor we need to apply to our VE table in order to correct our main fuel table or VE table. So it makes it really easy. So on top of that though, we also have the ability over here on the right hand side to incorporate a range of filters. So we can filter out transients where we are bringing in acceleration enrichment. We can filter out closed throttle or areas where we are above or below a certain manifold pressure. Basically whatever we want to do to give us really good quality data. Another nice thing with this is we can see over here on the left hand side, it shows us that we had, for this piece of data, it's not actually that big a file, but 941 pieces of data, 941 samples. And the color coding out here, this is based on how many hits we had in those cells. So basically the brighter the colors, the more hits we had. And if we scroll over one of these cells, we can see this particular cell I've got the cursor over at the moment has 216 hits in it. We get to these white cells here, and these are just sort of a flash in the pan. We've only got one or maybe two hits, so we can base our decisions on how much good data we've got. So it makes it much faster to fine-tune your fuel table, and also you can gather a lot of data very quickly, and you don't have to worry about actually focusing on your laptop or your air fuel ratio meter while you're actually on the road tuning. You can come back, pull over to the side of the road, come into the pits, and then actually make your tuning changes. So it's nice and safe. You can focus your energy on actually controlling the car rather than trying to actually perform your tuning. Right, we'll just head back over to my laptop software, or I will head back to my notes for a second here, and we'll just grab up our next piece of information here. So this is, if we come across to my laptop now, this is a Instagram I put up last week, which is actually quite an old photo I took. This is back off my old Evo 3 drag engine, and it was something that I found quite interesting, so I posted up about it. So we've probably all seen the likes of the HPA purple coloured cambelts, or maybe a Tomei or a Gates or whatever. They're from a few different manufacturers, and I know a lot of people probably wonder, well, are these worthwhile? Do they actually do anything, or are they just a pretty colour? So we actually found back when I was running my old drag car that the likes of these aftermarket belts, the one I tried here was the HKS, so I can't speak for all of them, they actually reduced the cambelt stretch, which can be important. So how we measured that was the 4G63 was converted to crank trigger, so it had a 12-tooth wheel on the crankshaft being picked up by a GT101 hall sensor, and it had a single sync sensor on the exhaust cam. So basically, by looking at where the synchronization input came relative to two of the crank teeth, the Motec ECU would actually represent that as a percentage. So in the ideal world, what we're trying to do is achieve a 50% sync position, which means that synchronization input's happening directly between two reference or crank teeth. But of course, the cambelt's always moving around a little bit. There's always a bit of whip in the cambelt. But the interesting thing with this engine revving out to 10.5, 11,000 RPM is we could consistently see the sync position moving towards one side through the rev range. So it would be up and down a little bit, but there was a consistent trend. So when we went to the HKS cam belt, it didn't eliminate that, but it did reduce it dramatically. So if you are wondering, are they worthwhile? Well, they do something. Now, there's also, as I posted that up, we had a few people quite rightly say, well, maybe retarding the cam timing at high RPM is beneficial. And yes, the general trend is that for high RPM performance, we do want to retard the cams. However, I like to know that once I've set my cam timing wherever I want it to be, that's where it's going to stay, particularly if you've got very tight valve to piston clearances. not really something where we want passive cam control coming in to affect our actual cam timing. Alright, we've finished up with our pre-show there, but before we do move on to our webinar, just one last reminder: Ecumaster EMU Black HPA VIP membership. There's 16 days left to get your name into the draw. There's a few other tasks to get you additional entries into that draw. Remember, zero risk, zero cost getting involved, so why not? We will ship this anywhere in the world as well. So if you've got a project car that you're building up in your back shed, this could be the perfect opportunity to get yourself a free ECU plus training for that car. Alright, give me a few moments here and we'll get started with today's webinar.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.